database administrator with VCGI. Over the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'm going to provide a presentation that is atypical when it comes to GIS presentations. This presentation is going to perform a marriage between some very basic business principles and GIS principles. It is going to focus in on the business capital nature of GIS data in particular. In the business world, capital is a term that is used a lot, and you will learn what that is if you don't already know it, and that's going to be our focal point. I'll go ahead and move along through and into the slides. Again, I'm going to take GIS data in particular into the context of some very basic business principles and focus on GIS data and how it can be or should be regarded as capital in an organization. On the end of the presentation, we will have a few minutes left for questions and discussion. Again, this is your atypical GIS presentation. We're starting with accounting here. It's an opportunity to get exposed to a little bit of accounting if you haven't been exposed to much of that already. These are some important concepts should you ever find yourself in a middle management role, leadership role in the world of GIS. So this equation here in yellow, it's the accounting equation. You see this in business on financial statements. You see this in financial statements, or it's a factor into financial statements that are behind nonprofits. All organizations have this, and even the individual has this equation behind financial transactions. For example, when you go to the bank and apply for a mortgage, they are likely doing this sort of math here. So what this equation means is, on the left side you have assets, and assets are stuff. Assets can mean many different things. Asset is the plant and equipment of the company. It's your house, it's furniture. It can even be taken down to the detailed level like pencils and office supplies. We're not going to focus on the quick assets. We're looking at long-term infrastructure that an organization has in order to pursue its mission. So these are all quantifiable, or most of them are, over on the left side of the equation. On the right side, you have to balance this with liabilities and equity, or sometimes it's called owner's equity. Liabilities is what you owe, and if there's anything left, that's your owner's equity or your stake in the organization. If the equity value has to be negative to balance this equation, it's a bad sign, a sign of bankruptcy. You don't want that. Now, going into the world of GIS, capital, again, is plant and equipment and the stuff you have in place in order to do what you do. And in GIS, we have our hardware. Sometimes our servers are up in the cloud, so that's more of a business expense than hardware down on the ground, capital, plant, and equipment on the ground. However, it's still like capital in nature in terms of how it's your framework for what you do. Software that you develop, software that you buy, and your data. This is a huge asset in a lot of organizations. If you think about it, there are a lot of governments out there and other organizations that spend tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars on procuring data. These are really big capital outlays, a lot of money there. And so does data deserve some respect in that sense? And also the metadata is very important. If you're going to spend a lot of money on a piece of equipment, some capital, some data, it's really great to have that asset tagged with who produced it, when it was produced, other characteristics, how it will be appropriately used, access constraints, this sort of thing. And the documentation and procedures that go along with your GIS implementation have a lot of value. The new hire can pick that up and not be so lost when they start their new job. Let's take a look at what we do when we work with GIS and put it to a business principle background, being this next equation here. So out in the business world and in the nonprofit world and even in government, we're trying to produce something with our GIS. That's our output. And output is a function of two things at a high pass look: your capital, your plant and equipment, aka data, software, and etc., and labor. And quality output needs both of these factors. They are both important. And again, we're focusing on capital today. Go over to the leftmost box there and take a look at some of the really good business questions that are asked of GIS. This is what we want. We want to find out answers. We want to solve some business problems. Like, for example, we might want to produce a heat map of traffic crashes, accidents, and analyze that and look for trends, look at the geometries of those accidents for providing information to the engineering process. Maybe we want to see not only a list of the fire hydrants that have a last flush date of before a certain date, but maybe geographically depict that. Or maybe a business wants to learn more about the geographic distributions of its customers. Maybe a business could learn more about their customers, or do they tend to go to stores that are in regional retail complexes, or is it neighborhood shopping, or different stores serving different types of customers? These are really good questions. This is where the value of GIS comes out. However, you have to put some good stuff into the process, and one of those elements of stuff is the capital area. There in the middle box, you'll notice we need good data in order to get good output with respect to analytics. We'll need the fire hydrants GIS data layer, a really good layer of that information. Maybe you're geocoding to road center lines or address points to see the locations of customers. You need good software and platforms and procedures to make all of this happen. And of course, over there on the right, the labor aspect of this is reflected. The knowledge, skills, and abilities are critical to making it happen. And also, subject matter expertise is a really good thing to have. If you have overlap between GIS technology and the business that you're serving, you're in a good spot. So here's another business equation. This is a really high pass look at it. A business or an organization is going to compute its net income by taking the revenue that is taken in and deducting expenses. And in the world of GIS, often managers, leaders, employees, analysts are asked to try to identify returns on investment from particular projects, and this can be computed by taking the net income that you're getting as a ratio to the capital outlay. So you've invested in this plant, this equipment, or your software and data, and let's get a return on investment. What are we getting out of that capital outlay? In the world of GIS, this is not always easily quantified. A lot of the benefits of GIS, especially in the government sector, are quite visible in the quality of life and customer service areas. However, anytime you can quantify something, some kind of return on investment with your GIS, maybe it's a savings in fuel expense, capture those metrics, because someday you may be asked for some performance metrics, and it's great to have some dollars to put into these reports, and then you can dollars get attention, and you can expand into the less quantifiable benefits. Back in 2007, I went to the Esri user conference out in San Diego, and I learned this concept right here. I found this particularly interesting. This demonstrates how the value of capital can fluctuate over time. I'll attach a caveat to this. I'm not suggesting that that GIS capital be accounted for literally and to be depreciated and appreciated like this graph shows. I'll leave all of the accounting rules up to the accountants. However, as a concept, this is very interesting. So Orthos, for example, when you first procure them, you get the flight, they're brand new, they have a lot of value because it's the latest and greatest data. And then the value of those Orthos starts to drop off in the first couple or 3 years because if you're flying every year, for example, there isn't a lot of temporal difference between one flight or the other. And then over time, something interesting happens. The value of those Orthos starts to increase because you can look back through 10 years and see some temporal change. Don't underestimate the value of really old aerial photographs and geo-referenced imagery and the old Orthos from decades ago. Protect that just like you protect the new data, because again, there is a lot of value here. Now this is another business principle from the study of economics, and it illustrates how you can't have it all. You're given a budget for a GIS program. You could spend it all on labor and have a really good team. However, if you don't have the capital, the tools, the data, software that you need, your output could be compromised. And if you focus too much on capital and you don't have staff with knowledge, skills, and abilities to put that capital to good use, well, that's not ideal either. So somewhere in between, there's a really nice sweet spot, nice balance. And I think we all know this. However, this graph, this illustration here helps us visualize it. So again, we're spending tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars on data and software. It's capital. We use it to carry out missions, and so it deserves documentation. We are big advocates here at VCGI for metadata. When you attach metadata to a data asset, it allows the GIS analyst to understand the resource. They have the opportunity to know where the data came from, the accuracy level of the data, when it was last updated, caveats, use constraints, cautions, field descriptions. An analyst might want to know how to query the data or how it might be queried out to produce certain views on it. Also, a well-documented system is great because, again, as you have turnover over time, the new hires can pick up the documentation and have something to go by as opposed to being left in the dark. And that helps you get back on track toward putting that capital to use. And again, we have, for example, a $100,000 asset, or in some cases, $1 million data assets. This is expensive stuff, and it deserves a disaster recovery plan. If you have a statewide data set of aerial imagery on a server, it would be a good idea to know, well, what happens if that server gets fried or if the building gets inundated? What are we going to do? How are we going to recover and assure that that capital persists? Because it will be needed in the wake of the disaster, maybe even more than ever. This presentation is driving toward a case for high quality data, giving it the respect that it deserves and the documentation that it deserves. When you have this philosophy, it fosters a really great infrastructure for getting what you want to get out of a GIS, whether it be efficiencies, reducing some costs, or the less quantifiable benefits such as simply supporting decisions. And again, it supports quality of life and has a lot of applications in the realm of public safety. There's also a lot of use of GIS technology in economic development. We want to do great things with it. However, we need the right capital and approach to capital to get there. And I argue that that street center line segment that you have in a GIS database is an asset just as much as that pavement out there on the ground. In the 21st century, a lot of business runs on data, and the business sector goes to governments to get data sets to use for their businesses, and it really supports a 21st century economy. And therefore, again, pavement gets respect, it's public works, it's infrastructure, it's very important. So is that GIS data that we use to model these things. So I've touched on this and how the government sector GIS realm supports the business community, businesses that are out there. The open data movement is really great in that it's opening a lot of data up to businesses and citizens to put to work. We've invested in it. Now it's opened up, and therefore a small business can go get data and use it with open source software without having to spend a lot on capital necessarily to visualize their business, maybe their customer locations, or help with, I don't know if there is an open source routing, but you can expand into the more sophisticated analytics if you like. And again, a lot of the base information starts in the government sector and then proliferates out into the business world. And the world of marketing. Here's another thing from business school. There are 4 P's to marketing, and they are product, price, promotion, and place. And that ties into GIS. And again, it's great to open up data to the marketing world. And it's really good to have open data out there so that businesses can have even more decision support for their plans. And I've already said it's GIS data is this capital or infrastructure for a 21st century economy. And I like this term here because it encapsulates the concept that I've been presenting, and that is we have a spatial data infrastructure, and we're very data rich now. If you go back 20 and 30 years, we didn't have the vast amounts of GIS data sitting around that we have now. And organizations started to acquire it. Governments acquired more and more aerial imagery and vector data sets over the years, and it has really grown. And now, again, we're getting into this open data world where it's not just in the organization anymore. It's opened up so that each organization or some organizations can access data resources from other organizations. And up at the federal tier, we have data.gov, the big open data portal. And then that layer of open data strategy has children and grandchildren down here at the state and local level. It's a really good trend. And we've reached my last slide. I will open it up to questions and discussion.
Okay, no questions yet, Ivan, but I will let you know as soon as they come in.
Okay.
Keeping in mind that occasionally when the presentation is very clear, there aren't as many questions because you covered everything well.
In case someone thinks of something later, my contact information is here on the slide.
Yep.
You can make note of it, and also, again, the PowerPoint will be posted to our website, and there's always YouTube.
Yep.
Where we have an impressive collection of videos, I might add. I might check some of those out on Saturday night.
Saturday night, huh? Okay. I see a question coming in. There it is. Oh, actually, so Deb Cohen from the EPA says, great intro to another aspect of the value of GIS. Thanks.
Great, you're welcome.
Well, I keep thinking people must be putting together questions because they're still on the webinar. I think sometimes it takes a minute for them to come through.
Sure.
I think maybe everyone else is waiting. Oh, here we go. Okay, Carrie Bushway asks, do local governments often not want to share their data? I run into roadblocks of using web mapping in our county website because of security.
Yes, this varies around the country. Some governments are very open about, local governments, some of them are very open about putting their data out there free of charge so that businesses and other organizations and individuals can put it to use. Some are wide open with it. Some charge a nominal fee just for the cost of media. This sort of approach, the cost recovery approach, it's normally not very much. And then there are some local governments that charge something even greater, up in the thousands, in the $1,000 and $2,000 category, and I even know of a case that's much higher than that. And some of those approaches are based on recovering the expenses or outlay in the capital, recovering some of the cost of procuring the orthos. It goes beyond just the expense to burning the disk. And there is data that probably shouldn't go out, certain sensitive data sets. There is that overlay to it. Some utilities infrastructure, for example, might be redacted. There's always that. However, I believe that most local governments have at least some data that isn't sensitive that would benefit many if it were put out there as open data.
And here in Vermont, I'll just comment that we have a pretty strong history of considering this type of data to be public information, and therefore, unless there is a legitimate security type of issue or privacy issue, generally speaking, it is assumed that you need to make it available in its native format. So just throw that out because I think Carrie's from a different state.
Yes, there is a wide spectrum of activity out there in terms of this topic. Again, some local governments are just very open and put the data out, and then on the other end of the spectrum, there have actually been lawsuits about this in terms of getting to the data. It's quite an array.
And I was just commenting the other day that I think most of those lawsuits have come out in favor of more open access to data, or at least not supporting exorbitant charges on public data. I just want to throw in that Pam actually was typing in at almost the same point as Carrie a related question, interestingly related question, and she says, I'm wondering if there's a way to help people quantify the value of data generated from an analysis. For instance, I conducted a flood risk analysis and now have a data set. How would our organization get paid for the product I created?
I was hoping that we wouldn't get a very difficult question. That is difficult, and that gets back to how it is a big challenge to quantify the benefits to GIS, a GIS program and GIS products. It's always a big challenge. And I don't know the answer to that. I do know that anytime there are dollar figures computed from anything, go ahead and grab them. Make note of them. You might need them later.
And I might just, it's not really related to Pam's question, which is specifically about the value of a specific product, but I just want to point to the fact that an ROI, a return on investment, was done for the concept of statewide parcel data, a data layer that probably all of us are familiar with. And I'm just going to get that up on my screen and then maybe switch it back to me. Parcel ROI. So if it's okay with you, Ivan, I'm going to switch the screen back to me. Where are we? Here we are. Just to show everyone this. So this is a return on investment report that was done for VTrans, for the Agency of Transportation, specifically focused on statewide digital parcels. And this is a nice long document that basically comes to the conclusion that yes, there's a real positive return on investment, and it essentially comes up with numbers that indicate kind of the multiplier of the investment. So if you invest $1,000, you're going to get back a value of, and it ranges from, I think, 1.5 to 5 or something like that. So if anyone is interested in taking a look at this, you can get to it by going to the VCGI website, and this is a little bit buried, but in About VCGI, Projects and Initiatives, Vermont Statewide Parcel Data Project, and then on this page there's a link to the Enterprise Geospatial Consortium Workgroup, and it's posted right near the top of that list. Vermont Parcel ROI Report, and that will get you to this. Just kind of a related but not exactly the same thing. So I think I made my, yeah, I think we're done with questions. So unless anybody wants to send another one in, just, there we go.
This is Ivan. I was reflecting on Pam's question a bit more, and I do recall an anecdotal evidence approach to getting ROI information. On a prior job, there was a particular data collection program that was in jeopardy, and the GIS manager solicited anecdotal reports from the users on what would happen if this program were taken away, and that actually did yield some really good anecdotal information. Again, it's not numbers, but it was testimony, and that program actually did go through, and it was funded.
So it gave them a way to look at it to come up with some numbers.
It did. I think it's made a business case. It supported the program, and maybe a lesson learned there is, I don't know if we have time to do this as GIS folks, but we might follow up on some of these products that we provide to, in the wake of it, to collect some information on how it was put to use and get these anecdotes and any numbers, collect it and store it somewhere so that if you need it,
so we have,
make a business case, you have something. Yeah,
that's a great point. All right, well, thank you for the good questions, and thank you, Ivan, for the great presentation. And as he mentioned, we will post this recording on both the our YouTube page, and there will be a link to it on our event archive page, and we will also post Ivan's PowerPoint there as well so that you can access that. Thank you, Ivan, and thank you, everybody.